On these animation loops, I'll show you the different stages of the animation process, from the sketchy rough animation, to the clean line work, to the color and cell shading. My animation partner Brittany Pinn does most of the cleanup on these. She helped me come up with ideas by drawing some rough thumbnails for the Dragon and Ice theme loops. The thumbnail stage is a great way to test concepts with quick visuals. Writing ideas down is great as a starting point, but you can't really know how it's going to work until you've sketched something. After getting the thumbnails done, we polished the design in the rough stage. But before moving on to cleanup, we fully animated the head on its own animation layer. Then I used a camera tool to track the motion of the dragon's head, and animating the body was as simple as connecting it into the moving head. I used a toon shader for the highlight on this, but there were some problems with the highlight disappearing where the body intersects and overlaps with itself. So we had to go over on another layer and touch up some of the highlights by hand. For the flying dragon, we were obviously inspired by Shinron from Dragon Ball Z. By the way, rest in peace to the great Akira Toriyama. Whenever someone passes, it's a reminder of mortality, and a reminder to prioritize our time because time is always moving. But you also don't want to overanalyze things because a life overexamined can be just as destructive as a life unexamined. There's a balance between having a plan and going with the flow. This is just 3 head drawings in a line boil, which is where you draw the same picture without actually animating it to make the lines feel like they're always moving a little bit. The first thing I did on this goopy water dragon was draw 2 keyframes, and you can see the body is shaped like this on the first frame, and the second keyframe is the complete opposite shape. So you can see these 2 S shapes oppose each other. And then it was just a matter of animating all the frames that go in between those 2 key shapes. And the process was actually to animate the head first, and then I drew the goopy body second, and then I drew the limbs third. And then after this body animation was in, I went in and did the whiskers on a separate layer. And the whiskers are secondary animation because they're being pulled along by the body, the primary motion of the water dragon. You would never draw the secondary animation first, so it wouldn't make sense to keyframe the whiskers in with everything else because they're being pulled along and dragged along by the primary action. Other examples of secondary animation would be loose clothing or hair or just any of the floppy bits that are kind of pulled along by characters. It adds extra life and it makes things feel more fluid. And on the cell shading, I leave a gap in between where the highlight is and where the outline of the goopy water is. Because if I were to just cell shade this all the way to the edge of the line, it would make it look a lot more flat. So that's a tip on cell shading, is to just follow the shape and think about the 3D form of what you're drawing. So if you were to imagine this goopy water as a cylinder, it would kind of look like that. And you just have to cell shade around that 3D form. For this fire dragon, I basically drew a completed frame first, this frame here, and then animated backwards into the starting point so that it'll come out. And then once I got to here on the key frame, I then animated forwards and let the fire dissipate and the flames break away. And I animated this in sections, drawing the outline frame first and then drawing the interior flames. This dragon was inspired by the Space Harrier video game. The monsters in that game are all made up of individual sections, so I only drew 1 frame for the head and moved it around with the camera tool. The body is made up of 1 drawing that I duplicated multiple times and moved with the camera tool. The sections of the body shrink in size as one piece overlaps the other, which makes a pseudo 3D effect with the flat images. For the ice loops, I was inspired by the color design in Ice Cap Zone from Sonic 3 on the Sega Genesis. I mean, I'm very inspired by 16-bit games since I grew up in the 90s. Ice is all about the highlights, and if you put darker tones of blue behind the highlights, That helps make the highlights pop out and look even more solid. On the snowman, I actually repurposed a previous animation of a walking bar of soap. Walk cycles can be tedious, and since I already had a front-facing walk cycle, I just used that as the basis for structuring the snowman. On this water turning into ice cube loop, I animated the water as its own loop, then the ice cube as its own loop, then made a layer of the water turning into ice and a layer of the ice turning into water. I used these transitional layers to connect the water to the ice and make a seamless cycle of water and ice turning back into each other. Please like the video if you've liked it so far, as that is the best way to help this channel grow and reach more people and whatnot. And a special shout out to these top Patreon supporters: King Leo Picasso, covering the latest in wrestling, found at No Dirt Sheets across all social platforms, and NoDirtSheets.com, SuperGalacticFantastic.com, Carlos Cervantes, Rogue DZ, Joe Berea, and James Mo. I have a bunch of animation tutorials and courses in the oven, and in the meantime, you can watch more animation process videos like this one by clicking on the end screen. See you in the next video.